Are you in a reading slump? Well, not anymore, you're not. Hello, I'm Kelsey Joe. Welcome or welcome back to Thought Couture. I was in a pretty deep reading slump from about mid 2022 to early-ish 2023, maybe 8 months or so, where I read next to nothing. If you've been in a slump before, or if you're in one now, you know just how much they suck. When reading is your hobby and your passion, but you have no motivation to do it, you kind of don't even feel like yourself anymore. Well, good news! Today I'm sharing 5 books I recommend for breaking out of a reading slump. I guarantee at least one of these is going to do it for you. You can thank me later. And while yes, I am in a new filming location, I'm hoping the lighting in here will be better for you. My first recommendation is a book about books, and that is Peter Orner's Am I Alone Here? This is a short collection of essays and anecdotes about books that have had a particularly strong effect on Order. And overarching all of the essays is a meditation on how books affect our lives and how our lives affect our books. What I enjoy about this collection is that these essays are not highly intellectual pieces of literary criticism. Rather, they're deeply personal and genuine. For example, the essay on Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse recalls the story of Orner reading the book while canoeing, dropping it in a lake, and then waiting for hours to dry out in the sun. And he even admits that part of the reason he was so anxious to save the book was the fact that he was 22 and thought Lily Briscoe was hot. Underneath that humorous account are thoughts on the nature of art amidst loss and grief. Orner presents himself as a guy who just really loves books, and that makes the essays approachable and relatable. Reading this collection always makes me recall and reflect on the books I've loved most in my life and why exactly they're so near and dear to my heart. I think if you're in a reading slump, it's important to remember why exactly you love reading in the first place, and essays like these help bring me back home. They motivate me to keep my relationship to language alive, and I think they'll do the same for you. Now, I must admit, I don't read fantasy. I just can't personally get invested in that heavily magical fairy tale-esque world building, but sometimes I do want to read and feel transported elsewhere. That's especially true if I'm in a reading slump. For that, I prefer historical fiction, and I especially recommend Affinity by Sarah Waters. Affinity is set in Victorian London and follows a lady of society named Margaret who becomes obsessed with a younger woman named Selina. Selina claims to be a medium, meaning she talks to the dead, but she's imprisoned for fraud. Margaret volunteers at the women's prison where Selina is held. The two become close and eventually make plans to escape London together. In essence, it's a Victorian lesbian ghost story. Need I say more? The story is gripping, it's fun, and it's kind of sexy, and the ending and the culmination of the mystery is satisfying but not predictable, which I think is important when you're in a slump. You don't want to see where you're going from a mile away, but you do kind of want things tied up nicely, and this does that. Plus, Waters is brilliant at writing in a period-appropriate style that really immerses readers in the setting. There were times I forgot I was reading a modern novel, and I thought that was pretty impressive. Although this is the kind of book I read primarily for entertainment, and I'm recommending you do too if you're in a reading slump, it does grapple with more serious topics. For example, in Affinity, we have discussions of women's sexuality, questions of a woman's place in society outside of marriage, and critiques of the prison system. So this is a fun, immersive read, but it still offers food for thought. All of that combined, I really think Waters will rejuvenate your reading. This next recommendation is kind of the opposite of the previous because it's a Victorian-era novel that feels surprisingly modern, and that is The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This novel was published in 1899 and caused such a scandal that Chopin was barred from the literary community and the publishing industry, and because she died 5 years later, she never really published or wrote again. Why was it so scandalous, you ask? Well, that's because our protagonist, Edna, says no to her husband sometimes. And she even kisses another man. Lock her up, we cannot have this menace on the streets. The Awakening takes place over the course of several months in Louisiana. While on a family vacation to the beach, Edna becomes infatuated with a man of a lower class, and as a result, she becomes disillusioned with motherhood and the idea that a woman's place is in the home. This is not a very plot-heavy novel. Instead, we witness Edna increasingly assert her independence and her personhood outside of domestic life to the shock and dismay of her family and friends. I recommend this book as a reading slump remedy because it's not at all difficult to read, the chapters are short and easily digestible, and more importantly, Edna is kind of a badass. Although the scandal of the novel is very tame by today's standards, Edna is so explicit in asserting herself that it's also wildly ahead of its time. Like, this is absolutely an early feminist novel. She states plainly that she has no desire to be a mother woman, and she's not ashamed of feeling sexual attraction. It's a ton of fun watching this 19th century housewife, who's expected to be meek, docile, and subservient, have no filter. And although the ending is tragic, the awakening got me excited to discover more outspoken female characters. And if there's one thing that's going to get me excited about reading, it's women. Period. It's women. If you watched my reacting to one-star reviews video, then you've heard me talk about this next book. It is Willful Creatures by Amy Bender. If you haven't, this is a short story collection that falls under the fabulism genre, which means that they incorporate elements of fairy tale and surrealism into our recognizable human world. It's similar to magical realism, but less believable. For example, my favorite story in this collection has children who are made out of potatoes. Yeah. I love these stories for how imaginative and even silly they can be, potato children, but Bender often adds this touching emotional element that makes the stories truly unforgettable. As mentioned previously, the potato children story makes me weep, as well as the final story, which isn't so much a story as it is a scene of a bunch of misfit people who come together to support and celebrate one another. It's really lovely. The surrealism combined with this unconditional love that pervades the collection creates these crystal clear images that are just a delight to ponder and return to. I first read Willful Creatures as part of a modern fiction course several years ago, and I enjoyed it so much that from there I just was searching for more fabulous writers, and I found people like Helen Oyeyemi and Italo Calvino. That's why I recommend this collection if you're in a reading slump, because it's a fabulous first foray into a genre that you might not have heard of before, but that you might love. Finally, I have some poetry for you that hardly needs an introduction, and that is Allen Ginsberg's Howl and Other Poems. It's a teeny tiny collection, but boy, does it pack a punch. I absolutely recommend this whole collection, but if nothing else, I suggest you focus on Howl itself. It's not controversial to say Howl is among the greatest feats of American poetry, if not American literature as a whole. If I were to describe the poem in one word, it would be electric, which is why I'm recommending it to you. I mean, the first line alone is enough to break a reading slump. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the streets at dawn looking for an angry fix, angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night. That was more than the first line, but you have to keep going. Howl, as well as most of the work in this collection, is the kind of poetry that begs to be read aloud, and as a result, it really overflows with life. Even if you're not typically a poetry fan, I think you'll love Howl because it really is a poem for the people. It is overtly political, so much so that it was put on trial for obscenity, and it really encapsulates the America of the 1950s by denouncing it. Howl is not exactly easy, but it is so electric and invigorating that it never fails to wake me up to the thrill of language, which is exactly what you need if you're in a reading slump. And if you are new to Ginsberg's work and you end up loving Howl, I also recommend the poem America from the same collection for pretty much the exact same reasons. I truly hope that one of these recommendations captures your interest and pulls you out of your reading slump, because I do not want you to be in there anymore. Now I want to hear from you. Do you have any recommendations of your own to help break out of reading slumps? Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? I would really love to know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss your next favorite read. And you can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Thought Couture for more book recommendations and reviews. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.